Good evening, everyone. We welcome all of you this evening, and thank you for joining us on this very special event put on by Centenary, an event that commemorates Executive Order 9066 by President Franklin Roosevelt on February 19th, 1942. As many of you know, that executive order authorized the U.S. government to create military zones in the western United States that led to the forced evacuation and relocation of approximately 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry to 10 concentration camps scattered across the country in remote areas. And I might add that it was FDR himself who used the term concentration camp in this order. Many of those who were interned were U.S. citizens by birth. A quarter of them were children under the age of 12, and that leads us to our reading tonight of this story, The Pink Dress. During the global pandemic we've experienced this past year, with the strains of lockdowns and isolation that have taken a toll on our young people, Suki's story is even more significant, bringing to light the turmoil those young people endured when they were forced from their homes and sent to barracks in the middle of nowhere without a trial or due process, only because of who they were, not because of anything they did. Those of us who were lucky enough to have known Leslie's mom, Moonza, know that she was a wonderful example of resilience and caring. And she was a lifelong member of Centenary United Methodist Church and was so involved in our local Japanese American community. And so now, in honor of all those who struggle against injustice in history and right now, at this moment, the members of Centenary United Methodist Church present The Pink Dress, a story from the Japanese American Internment by Leslie Kitashima-Gray.
Thank you, Reverend Mark. This book is dedicated to those who stand up against injustice and give courage to the rest of us to do so as well. And to Moonza Kitashima, the inspiration for this and many extraordinary stories. Pink Dress. Suki could see the moon floating beyond the barbed wire fence, like a moon, like a pearl on a blue satin scarf. The moon looked strange, showing itself when it wasn't supposed to, during the day. The sun was up, and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Suki hoped Lizzie would arrive soon, so they could see the moon together.
But big sister Lizzie still had not arrived by 5 o'clock. Suki, which meant moon in Japanese, and her mother stood in the doorway at their barrack, feeling the chill in the air. Suki noticed a line of ants moving along the edge of the wall. They marched identically, like black dots typed across a page. Did they see the moon out too, or were they not allowed to look up? Adi worked hard and always survived, Mama said, tapping her hand on the ugly slatted wall. She sighed and went inside the barrack. Adi, Japanese for ants. Suki turned and followed her.
They had not seen Lizzie for several months, since she was allowed to leave camp and work in New York. The government had moved everyone out from the West Coast, but they didn't seem to mind the Japanese Americans living on the East Coast. Lizzie now worked for a linen store and had a few days off to come and visit. Suki missed Lizzie more since they hadn't seen the rest of the family for a long while. All of Suki's brothers were in the U.S. Army fighting somewhere far away, and the oldest sister, Aiko, was with her husband's family in a different camp. Lizzie was the only one who could come to visit.
Lizzie finally arrived just as the sun started to dim. She wore a long brown coat and a pale yellow hat. Her eyes shone bright as the spotlight from the guard towers started to crank on, but she looked thin and weary. The train ride to Colorado was long, and they almost didn't let her come in, since it was so late. Suki fingered the name tag on the small suitcase as she helped carry inside. It said Elizabeth and their last name. Mama still called her by her Japanese name, Tachiko.
Lizzie did not stay in her brown coat for long. She stood near the little stove at the far end of the room and removed her hat and coat in the warmth. Underneath the heavy wool, Lizzie wore a pink dress. It was a rose shade of pink with white polka dots evenly spaced across the rounded lapels and down the paneled skirt. Suki stared at her sister for several moments. The intense color seemed to glow in the chilly room. Lizzie was 5 years older, but she stood the same height as Suki. She turned around quickly, and the white polka dots fluttered with the skirt. It reminded Suki of the porcelain dolls they used to see in the fancy downtown stores back home. A sudden longing to be back home rose up in Suki's throat. Lizzie asked if something was wrong. Suki said no, she was just glad to see her.
Mama stared at the dress too, as they pulled up the two old chairs next to their wobbly table. Mr. Kajiyama had made the table for them when they first arrived in camp. He used to be an engineer or something, but now he worked in the camp dry goods store. While Suki made tea, she thought about the other people in the store. Mrs. Yasuda, Mr. Inoue, the Ota's second son. Some of them were angry about being in camp, but most of them just worked and waited. Suki sometimes felt angry, but didn't know why. They were just there in camp. That was all.
You should not be worrying about us, Mama said after she thanked Suki for the tea. Everything will work out.
Lizzie let out a small cry. You always say that, Ma. It doesn't make it right. The wood in the stove suddenly sputtered.
The government decided.
Maybe they made a mistake. Lizzie was not looking at Mama at all, but moving her eyes rapidly from the paper and chicken wire walls to the windows placed too high to look out. Suddenly, she put her hands flat on the wobbly table. Why did we have to leave home? Why are only Japanese people locked up here? Aren't Germany and Italy fighting against America too?
Shh, whispered Mama. Everyone can hear you.
But we didn't do anything wrong, except have slanted eyes.
Mama put her hand up and tilted her head away from Lizzie. Lizzie was silent. She knew that gesture well. We don't talk about this when your father comes in, Mama whispered.
Moments later, Suki heard the footsteps outside. Papa had come back from working in the shoe repair shop in the consumer cooperative called the Co-op. He gently swung open the door and rubbed the cold from his hands. Suki was reminded of the mornings back home when Papa would rub his hands as he shooed them out the door for school. She wondered what was happening to their old house and the shoe repair business they had to vacate so quickly. As he came in, Lizzie stood up from her chair so he could sit, and suddenly the little room became filled with laughter as Papa talked about his friends at the shoe shop and Mama's friends in the mess hall kitchen. Lizzie told them all about the long train ride, the hurried life in New York, the linen store, and the kindly old woman she worked for.
We don't see color like that around here, Papa laughed, nodding towards Lizzie in her pink dress. People can't afford to stand out too much. Lizzie smiled and explained that she didn't buy the dress, but that it originally belonged to her boss's daughter, who had outgrown it and never worn it. Her boss thought it might be nice for Lizzie to have something pretty, something the city girls wore. It had been more of a sympathy gift than anything else. Although Lizzie wasn't sure she appreciated charity, she did like the color. It was later that night, just before squeezing together on the lumpy, straw-filled mattress, that Suki and Lizzie got to talk. Mama and Papa had to get up early as usual. They drew the curtain across the rope that separated the tiny room and left the sisters on the other side.
Lizzie was sad that she could only stay for the night and had to go back on the train the next day. She said that she wanted to bring a present, since Suki was going to be graduating this year, but didn't know what to give. It was Suki's last year in junior high. I don't know how long this war is going to go on, Lizzie said, and I'm not sure I'll be able to come back for your graduation.
You think we'll still be in here when I graduate? Suki asked. She had not thought about going to high school behind the barbed wire fences. She just assumed they'd go home.
I don't know. Lizzie started to open her suitcase to take out her nightgown. I can't make any sense of it.
Suki was stunned by what Lizzie said. You don't think we'll ever get out?
I didn't say that. Lizzie's hands shot out and seemed to tremble. The war has to end someday, that's for sure. I just don't know when. In the meantime, Lizzie looked around at the ugly thin walls and frowned.
Suki tried to catch Lizzie's eye. In the meantime, should we be doing something?
I'm trying to take some business classes, Lizzie continued. I'm hoping it might help after the war is over. Accounting, finances, I could get ahead with some know-how like that. She suddenly turned and faced Suki. This war will end. It will. And I want to be ready. She then looked down and shook the pink skirt, smoothing it over her knees. Surrounded by the rough black walls of the room and the chilly night beyond, the pink dress seemed to glow even pinker. Suki couldn't help staring at the little white dots and the rosy folds of the cloth. Lizzie looked up. You really like this dress, don't you? She said suddenly.
Suki reached out a hand and touched the smooth lapel, nodding. I'd like to wear this dress for my graduation. You have to come back so I can borrow it.
Lizzie laughed and squeezed her sister's hand. It might be a little bright for this place, but Shh, a voice said from the other side of the tar paper walls. So many families were crammed into one barrack, and with the walls being so thin, there is no telling who would overhear all of your conversations.
Suki looked into her sister's face. The lines of fatigue showed in the dim light. Lizzie looked suddenly too old for this dress, the white polka dots speckling her like snow on a rusty statue. It's your dress, Suki whispered, but I do like it a lot.
Lizzie said nothing, only smiled.
Lying in bed, Suki thought the pale glow of the moon was moving through the windows of their room. She liked to think it was searching for her, to tell her secretly that she was special. But she knew it was shining over all the windows on all the people in camp. even on all the ants. They all had to share the moon. Her eyes closed, listening to the breathing that echoed through the barracks from all the families, her own and others, sharing the cold spaces between the tattered paper walls. In the morning, Lizzie said goodbye and told Suki she would try to write. It was hard seeing Lizzie leave, escorted out of the front gate by a soldier. Suki waved as Lizzie turned one last time. The pretty pink fabric fluttered in the wind as Lizzie wrapped her coat around herself and left camp.
When Suki was called to the counselor's office, she made it a point to stay quiet. Her grades in math and history were very poor, and she might not be able to graduate with the rest of her class. The counselor felt that Suki was not showing any interest in her work. "Don't you want to get a good job when you go back home?" the counselor asked. She was a big woman with curly gray hair that surrounded her head like a threatening rain cloud. Suki said nothing. The counselor leaned forward. The sun's glare was reflecting off one of the guard towers. Its shadow fell across the counselor's window and seemed to add a dark halo to her cloudy head. "Don't you want a better life when you get out of here?" "What makes you think we're getting out of here?" Suki whispered, keeping her eyes fixed on the shadow. "You are a very impolite girl," barked the counselor, pushing back in her chair. "You might learn some manners from a suspension."
The next morning, Suki watched the students make their way to school. A group was shuffling down the path between the barracks, looking at first like ants moving in unison. As she concentrated, though, Suki could make out three of her friends. Yai, who adored peppermints, Abi, with the scar behind his ear from a dog bite, and Kinu, who had told everyone she would own a swimming pool when they all went home. Suki saw them move to the end of the line of barracks, turn and disappear. Mama was angry over the suspension, but huffed when Suki explained it was just for one day. With Mama and Papa at work anyways, Suki had no intention of spending the entire day inside the barrack. Perhaps a walk around the compound would enlighten the mind of a rude student.
Suki made her way toward the far edge of the camp. In the sky, the clouds were absent, leaving only the stark blueness of the cold morning. The wind was still strong, and some of the men were struggling to harvest the field crops planted for the mess hall. Suki glanced around warily. The barbed wire coiled through the fences like gray thorns with no roses, clinging with tight claws. The guards posted around the perimeter had warned everyone about keeping far away from the fence. And they were serious. Once, a 4-year-old little boy named Teddy wandered too close, chasing a bird. The bullet went straight through his arm, but it made it difficult for the doctor to stop the bleeding. He said it was lucky that I didn't shatter the bone or do something worse.
From this far out, Suki could see the rows of barracks lined like identical gray wedges in the dull brown earth, fading back into the distance. The parade of men hoeing the ground just beyond appeared just like one large insect, carving a path in the hard soil. The sky was bright and sharp, but cast a cold light on everything. Every line pierced its way through a sullen earth and was the same as the next one. She squinted slightly in the strong wind and observed the row of men. Their heads were bobbing up and down like ants, lifting and dropping, picking and dragging. Suki thought she could recognize some faces she knew, but the glare and the wind made it impossible to see. The rows of ants moved slowly forward as one unit, and Suki continued to watch them.
Suddenly, one body jerked up and out of line. Hands flailed frantically in the wind, snatching at something white, a neck kerchief. The row halted, and suddenly everyone began an irregular dance, chasing the kerchief as it sailed like a nervous white dove away from the owner's fingertips. They darted off and tried to grab it, but the kerchief was determined to be free. It jumped on the wind again and sent them running, lost and wild. It fluttered through the shadows of the guard towers, scattering the row of men who are now no longer one creature, but a variety of human beings, short, fat, skinny, tall, leaning, straight, grumpy, laughing, yawning, and frightened as they frantically chased the little white kerchief. Suki could hear someone calling something urgent.
The men stopped short. The fence was in front of them. The kerchief swung on the updraft, tumbled, and snagged on the barbed wire. Suki stared at the white kerchief fluttering like a trapped butterfly. A fierce anger, worse than her anger at the counselor, poured into Tsuki like a liquid fire. She turned quickly and went back toward the shelter of barracks, away from the windswept voices of the men as they went back to their work.
The counselor was quite pleased when Suki's math and history scores improved enough to pass the classes. It seemed that Suki was showing some determination for the first time, although Mama could tell it was something more than just passing a test. Her teacher barely noticed that Suki said very little during class, and less as the semester wore on. She simply stared back at them from her desk, almost willfully looking through the tarred paper walls.
Before the end of school, they received a letter from Lizzie. She was very pleased that Suki was going to graduate, but was unable to take another trip out. Be very proud of yourself, Lizzie wrote on a separate page addressed to Suki. I don't care what Mama says about being humble and accepting things. You should walk through that graduation with a big smile and your head held up high. Do that for me, will you? Do that no matter what anyone says. Mama suddenly handed Suki something folded in a brown bag.
This package came too, she said, pointing to the one on the name on the label. It was addressed to Suki. The bag had already been opened by the inspection officers and taped back up clumsily. Suki easily pulled open the flap and the pink dress slid out. She caught it before it fell to the floor. The fabric was so silky it almost felt like water. Suki squealed with laughter so loud that Mama shushed her, glancing at the walls. Papa just chuckled and sipped some more tea.
The graduation date was set, and the school superintendent announced that there would be an official color for the graduation, olive green. Pants, jackets, and dresses of all graduating junior hires were to be this color. Many anxious parents descended on the dry goods store to purchase material for the event. Everyone was taking this graduation very seriously. There was a thought that this might be the only graduation they would ever celebrate. Suki's mother came home a little early from setting up the mess hall for dinner. "We have to go get the materials, Suki," her mother panted in Japanese, gathering her purse and examining the few bills and coins in her wallet. Suki was standing in the path of the curtain. "Let's go," her mother said.
I don't want to wear green, Suki whispered calmly.
Her mother looked directly at her. "What?"
Suki puckered her lips slightly. "I want to wear the pink dress."
Her mother did not flinch, but held her purse as if any second she would dart out the door. "The color the school wants is green."
I know, Suki replied, respectfully still looking down.
Mama remained rigid.
Suki kept her eyes on the floor. She traced the lines of the splintery wood slats and saw the crevice where the wind always pushed its coldness inside the barrack. I don't want to be an Adi, Suki whispered.
"Ah," Mama said, as if suddenly perceiving a detail in an intricate pattern. She rubbed her lips with her finger. "Adi are hardworking," Mama said finally. "Adi are strong, and they survive."
Adi are all the same, whispered Suki, even more quietly. She bit her lip. And we are not the same.
Suki's mother took a step closer to her daughter and paused again. Suki could tell Mama was staring at her. "To them," Mama said, "we are."
Suki shook her head. But it's not true. She lifted her eyes slowly to her mother, taking in her stare. I don't want us all to be the same. I want to wear Lizzie's pink dress.
Suki's mother regarded her silently and then put her wallet back into her purse. "I think the pink dress would be very beautiful for your graduation," she said, gently brushing some hair away from Suki's face. She started to go, then turned. Mama's lips trembled in a faint smile as she raised her hand and touched Suki's dress. "Suki-chan, you make me very proud," Mama whispered before she turned and went back to the mess hall.
The graduating class for the junior high was not very large, but enough for rows of chairs to be set up in the gymnasium for the ceremony. They were to march into some boring music. The chairs reminded Suki of all the people lined up for inspection on the first day in camp. The music suddenly started. One by one, the students began filing into the gym, their olive green dulling the harsh lights. The procession, like a somber parade, flowed steadily as the students took their seats in the chairs. Only a few more students, and then Suki would have to enter the great big room. Suki felt surrounded by waves of green uniforms. For a few moments, she fought the impulse to run back to the barrack. Then she began recognizing the faces of her friends.
She saw Kenji scratching one of those big ears of his. He had a bad cough and did not appreciate soy sauce. She watched a pudgy girl named Mary pull her hair behind her ears. Her father used to own his own restaurant, but now cooked food in the mess hall and secretly scooped more for people who seemed especially thin. Suki saw the kids just ahead of her cross the threshold. She saw Kaz shoot a wink at Sumi. Kaz had asked one of the guards if he liked pointing guns at kids. Sumi had 4 older brothers and said that everyone should be in the U.S. Army like they were. They never mentioned her 5th and youngest brother, who was actually in jail for refusing to fight. Each face had a different look, a different smile, a different story. She looked around at the bright faces in the sea of olive green. She knew these could not be Audie. They would never be Audie.
The people right in front of her were starting to move ahead. Through the doorway, Suki could see her counselor sitting on the stage, looking down on the entering students. Suki suddenly looked up. The moon was out again during the daytime. It was a faint crescent of white in the pale blue sky, a window of hope secretly appearing behind a drawn curtain.
She was within reach of the doorway now and took off the coat she had been wearing. There might have been some murmuring and indignant whispers as Suki stared straight ahead and marched down the aisle to the music. If any eyes were frowning or narrowed in displeasure at such a lovely dress, Suki refused to notice them. Those eyes only saw ants instead of students, Ari instead of human beings. But she also knew that they were wrong. My mother was held in a Japanese American internment camp in the barren area between Colorado and the Kansas border during World War II. This is her story. It is a true story she told to me, a true story we are telling to you. It took a lot of courage for her to stand up to eyes that only saw ants instead of people, Ari instead of human beings. And we hope in sharing her story, we can pass on some of that courage to you. So thank you very much for coming. I'd like to invite Reverend Mark back, and we will have a brief Q&A. We would very much appreciate if you are coming back for the Q&A, that you type your questions in the chat, and then we have some monitors that are going to speak those out. And so Reverend Mark, can you come back to the spotlight here?
Yeah, I'm here, Leslie. Okay.
Where are you? There you go. Okay, cool.
First of all, let me say thank you to all of the readers.
Oh yeah, sorry. We were supposed to wait. We were supposed to put up the credits, please, Cynthia. Thank you so much to our readers, our technical expertise people, our publicity assistants, and especially to Reverend Mark for helping us support this event in the middle of the pandemic.
No, it's great. We've got 100 people online tonight, and as someone mentioned in the chat during the reading, such a very intergenerational cast of readers tonight. So again, thank you all so very much. I couldn't resist scrolling through all the names in the attendance list tonight, and you all are special. I mean, first of all, you all took the time to be online tonight on a Friday night, no less. So thank you. But there's three folks, actually four, who I want to just give a shout out to. Number one, Reverend Hidemi Ito is with us tonight. Former pastor at Centenary. Good to see Hidemi. In fact, I was at Faith Torrance earlier today where Hidemi worships lately. Also, we have Larry and Diane Honda from United Japanese Christian Church up in Clovis, Fresno area. Good to have Larry and Diane. And then finally, got someone who's so special to me, Naomi Goto from Sacramento Japanese United Methodist Church is online tonight. Naomi made the robe that I wear, that all of you see me wear. And so Naomi, after 26 years, that robe has held up so good. I think it's on its third set of Velcro, the fasteners that keep it together. But great to have Naomi. Naomi's daughter Courtney teaches, she's a professor at Boston University School of Theology. But great to have Naomi, and again, Larry and Diane Honda, and Reverend Hidemi Ito with us. I'm sure we've got other notables online tonight with us. And again, just thanks all of you for joining. Okay. So we did have some questions just to try and tie this all together that we want to throw out. Kind of like, I guess you can call this the pink dress Jeopardy game. So the first question is, how many concentration camps were there? How many? You could just type it in the chat. Or if you want to, actually we're all online, so you could voice it. Who knows how many? Okay, there's a response.
Yeah. Looks good. I see the correct answer coming up.
Okay, so here's the natural follow-up question to that. What were the names of those 10 camps? And you could shout it out online or type it in the chat.
I think we're gonna keep it to typing.
Keep it to typing, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're gonna have an audio overload. So yeah.
Okay.
So what do we? So my mom's camp was Grenada Amachi. So if people wanted to know, that's where she was. Anybody else? Minidoka, right? Gila River, Topaz, Poston, Rower, Jerome, Heart Mountain, Manzanar, right? Tule Lake. Did we get them all?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay. Here's one question that I thought I'd throw in at the last minute. Where did most internees go before they ended up in camp? Where did most, not all, because I know there are some who went straight from their homes to the camps, but where did most internees go before being shipped off to their camps?
Oh, I see it in chat. Yep. Some.
Okay. Well, so that's what Santa Anita is correct.
And here for this one, my mom was at Santa Anita for there was an interim.
Right. Okay, Tanforan, which is a racetrack up north, California. Okay,
yeah, the Assembly Center, right.
The term right. Okay, all right, good. What other assembly centers do you folks know of or can think of? So we've had Santa Anita, the home of Seabiscuit, Tanforan, others. Fresno County Fairgrounds, okay, Puyallup, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Yeah, so for most people, again, not all, most people, when they were rounded up, they spent maybe a month or two at an assembly center. And it was there at the assembly center where the authorities determined what camps you would get sent to. In fact, speaking of Sacramento, during my years in Sacramento, one year we had a commemoration of the Wallaga Assembly Center, which really isn't well known, but that was a local assembly center in Sacramento where folks went to. And as you can figure out, most of the assembly centers, they were either racetracks or fairgrounds, places that, were able to accommodate large numbers of folks.
And they were actually most of them were in the animal areas. I mean, there's like horse stalls and things where the animals had very recently been there as they cleaned them up for the people to get there.
When one of my aunts passed away a few years ago, I told a story that she had shared with me, and I don't even think her daughter, my cousin, had heard this story before. But my aunt told me, so my aunt and uncle, they got married while they were at Santa Anita. But what happened was the military police drove them to the Pasadena courthouse where they got married, then drove them back to Santa Anita racetrack. Their friends decided to throw them a wedding party since they couldn't, and really it was a simple party. All they had was a wedding cake, and the cake had to be ordered from outside. They couldn't use the commissary or the kitchen to make anything. And so the story my aunt once shared with me was that when that wedding cake, they ordered it from a local bakery, I guess in the city of Arcadia, which is where Santa Anita is located. But anyway, when the cake was delivered to the camp by the bakery, one of the MPs, military police, opened up the box and stuck his bayonet through the cake just to make sure there wasn't a gun or some kind of weapon planted in that cake. Gosh, yeah, can you imagine that? Again, just another type of indignity that the internees had to suffer during that time in their lives. Another question. How many suitcases was each person allowed to bring on the bus when it came time for them to go to camp? Anyone want to take a guess? Anyone? I know we have at least a few folks on tonight who were in camp. You remember how many suitcases you were allowed to bring?
I think a lot of people are saying one in chat.
Okay,
My cousin Liz says two.
Okay. No, the answer is one. One suitcase is all you were. Now, I don't even know if there was a size that was specified, but one suitcase. And this is important for us in the churches because, well, for example, Centenary, like so many churches, was used as a place for people to store a lot of things that they couldn't take with them to camp. I have some receipts. As a matter of fact, USC, at that time, University Methodist Church, which was on the campus of USC, USC opened its basement and allowed Japanese Americans to store things there. And I have some receipts or copies of receipts from Centenary members at that time who took things down and stored them at University Methodist Church on the campus of USC during that time. One of the stories that I've shared over the years with the members of Holman United Methodist Church here in Los Angeles. Holman United Methodist Church is one of our flagship African American churches, not just here in LA, but throughout the country. West Yamaka always told me, and those of you who remember Reverend West Yamaka, his father, Reverend Izuru Yamaka, who was an Issei, he was the pastor of Centenary at the time of evacuation. And then during resettlement, when everybody came back, Reverend Yamaka was allowed to continue at Centenary. Wes once told me, well, not just once, but several times, he told me that when the Centenary folks came back from camp, all of their things were in exactly the same place they had left them when they got on the buses and went to camp. And Wes said, my father always said, the reason our items were so secure there those 3 years was because the members of Holman United Methodist Church used the Centenary Sanctuary during those 3 years to worship. And so the Holman members watched over all of our items. Holman, they didn't have the big building they have nowadays up on Adams. In fact, at that time, Holman was a small offshoot of a congregation in East LA that wanted to establish a home here on the west of the Harbor Freeway. And so they didn't have their own building at that time. So they used the Centenary Sanctuary during those war years. And then after the war, when Centenary folks came back and resumed worship, Holman continued to actually rent the sanctuary. And in fact, at the district office, I have somewhere an actual lease agreement dated 1945, 1946, something like that, between Holman and Centenary for the Holman members to use the sanctuary. I've misplaced it. I can't find it. I'm going to have to tear my office apart.
Well, you can find that, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Cool.
I'm sorry. Just a couple more questions. These questions Leslie and I kind of thought of, or Leslie and a few others. Okay. Does anyone know what the population of the camps were? The total is easy. I mean, simple arithmetic, right? But 120,000 divided by 10, that's your average. But in terms of each specific camp, anyone know what the numbers were in each camp? Nope. Okay. All right.
Mark, we have a question in the chat. If you don't.
Yeah.
For some reason, I'm not getting everything in the chat.
All right.
Getting certain
So
things.
let's answer the one that you just asked, because
Okay.
I mean, one of the, I believe in my mom's camp, it was 7,000 people were at Granada Amachi. So I remember when we went to Amachi recently, or not recently, in 2004, that they were saying there, it was between like 5 and 12,000 in the different camps. At the time that Amachi was had people there at 7,000, they were something like the third biggest city in Colorado, something really horrible like that.
Mhm. Okay. Oh, okay. I see what's happening now. I know why I wasn't getting all the messages. Now I'm getting them. So, okay. Okay.
I think we have a question about the people serving, right, Todd? Something like that?
Yes. So it was, question was, what percentage of young men served in the U.S. Armed Forces? And how often were they criticized by other members in the camps?
I think that's a question for you, Mark. I don't know the answer.
I should know the answer. I don't, just off the top of my head, I don't. That'd be a good question for Mitch Mackey at Go for Broke National Education Center.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The answer to the second question, though, how often were they criticized? I'm sure it happened, but my sense tells me the overwhelming sentiment was that, well, they weren't criticized for serving. If anything, again, it was a sign of loyalty, regardless of what you might think about the concept of loyalty. It was a sign of loyalty. So, yeah.
I think in some respects, like my father served in the 442, was not in camp because he came from Colorado. So I think the issue sometimes is the disparity between how the soldiers coming from camp were treated by people in camp and how the Japanese American soldiers coming back that were treated in the cities. It's kind of like the African American soldiers coming back and harassed and treated badly, even though they're in uniform. So.
And Leslie, you touched on a good point. You're saying your dad was from Colorado and therefore he wasn't in the camps. And that's a good point. Remember, 9066, Executive Order 9066, in and of itself did not establish the camps. In a larger sense, it did. But what it established were military zones. Okay, and I believe the military zones went from the coast to about 900 miles inland. Okay, so if you live beyond, if 900 miles is the right number, just for argument's sake. So if you live beyond the 900 miles, then you didn't have to go to camp. Okay, and that's why folks from Denver, Japanese Americans, didn't have to go to camp. In fact, during my time in Sacramento, we had a family there. The father was from Idaho, and he didn't have to go to camp. I think, no, he was from either what would be the southeastern tip of Oregon or the western tip of Idaho, but he didn't have to go to camp. But he said, though, he often visited several of the camps that were near his town, wherever he grew up, just to visit the internees. Okay, many of you have heard the story. Colorado Governor Ralph Carr welcomed Japanese Americans to Colorado. He opened up the state, and because of that, he lost the election the following year. I mean, that's a fact. He basically, I have a feeling he knew he was committing political suicide by welcoming Japanese Americans to Colorado during that time, but he did it anyway. And when you go to Denver, some of you have probably seen it. If you go to Sakura Square downtown, there's a bust of Colorado Governor Ralph Carr there at Sakura Square. There's also a bust of Min Yasui as well, but yeah, there's a bust of Colorado Governor Carr. And here's the irony, he was a Republican. FDR was the Democrat. So, okay, all right. In fact, California at that time Attorney General, Earl Warren, who basically stepped aside and allowed everything to happen. He was a Democrat. You know, the political affiliations aren't cut and dried, as folks would like to think of them. Okay. Right.
So Todd, Caitlin, Jonathan, do we have like maybe 2 more questions?
There's another one that came in. The pink dress is about your mom's story, Leslie. So what do you think Moonza would say about tonight's reading? That came from Vicky.
From Vicky. She'd probably say, congratulations to everybody. I'm glad I can sit in the back row and watch.
Okay.
So we have one last question.
I think we're good on the chat. I do have a question though from me. So if people are interested in, you know, having this sort of thing, or if there are other things that you do in terms of sharing this story, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you to discuss ways to share this in other places or in other formats?
Well, I think for certain they can get in touch with Centenary. They can get in touch with me. I have a website which is a little old right now for various reasons, but it's www.tri.pi.org. I will put that in the chat right now. That has my theater stuff in, and you can get in touch with me via that. I think I teach a lot around in different arts organizations and workshops and things. So yeah, I think if you are interested, if you don't know me personally or via somebody else, get in touch with the church, and you know, we'll be happy to. If you're interested in the book itself, I have copies of the book. It is on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, but they only have the paperback version. If you go to Ex Libris, which is the original publisher, they will have the hardback version.
Okay. Gosh, I guess we could stay online all night. I don't think uh,
We really appreciate everybody that came out to watch the reading and support this. Again, it's very important that we continue to tell these stories and remember the history that has happened, so that we don't revisit these same mistakes. Oh, great! Look at that, great. Yeah, thank you so much to all of our readers and the people that helped organize this, especially Cynthia Nishinaka and Judy Asazawa and Todd Sasaki, and again, everybody involved in the reading. It was really, really, really good to be able to be together, even though it was Zoom, to get this together and work on something.
We were able to do this because of Zoom. So
this time, yes. So I think if we're good, maybe you want to sort of send us off, Mark, and then we'll close the program.
What is this, church?
Yes. I don't know what we can do.
Let me just thank you, all of you personally, for coming online tonight. Gosh, I would like to think that, you got 100 people online tonight. The cynical part of me says, gosh, don't you guys all have something better to do tonight? But thank you, though. You made it very special and made it worth everyone's while. So in all seriousness, thank you so very much. God's blessings continue to go with all of you during this season of Lent, and as we anticipate a joyful Easter, particularly now that there is light at the end of the COVID tunnel. And so we just keep our hopes up. All right.
All right.
Thank you very much. Okay, amen.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good evening and take care and stay safe. All right. Bye-bye.